This police department is different from others. No, they're not pursuing illegal alien immigrants like those men in black suits. Instead, they're chasing deceased individuals. The movie starts with two police officers, Nick and Roy, chasing a hefty man. But this isn't an ordinary overweight person. It's remarkably fast and can cling to walls. 3 or 4 days ago, Nick buried gold pieces in his backyard, placing an orange tree on top. He lives with his wife, Julia, who notices the tree. Nick changes the subject, diverting the conversation to their financial situation. However, Julia reassures him that she doesn't need material things, just her husband. At the police station, Nick informs his partner, Bobby, that he's decided to submit the gold as evidence from their recent drug bust. Bobby tries to persuade Nick to stick to their plan, explaining that he needs the money for Julia, but Nick doesn't want to disappoint her and is determined to do what's right. Nick assures Bobby that he won't implicate him. Unexpectedly, Bobby agrees, saying he'll also turn in his gold, affirming Nick's decision. Their conversation is interrupted by another police officer who announces they have the address of another drug syndicate. They head out for another drug bust operation. On the way, Nick jokingly radios to other officers that Bobby has a motivational message for the team. Playing along, Bobby reminds everyone to stay safe and not get shot. Ironically, it's Bobby who shoots Nick during their raid on the drug syndicate. Bobby claims he can't allow Nick to turn in the gold and shoots him, causing him to fall and die. But this isn't the end for Nick. He opens his eyes to find time frozen around him and sees a vortex in the sky pulling him in. Nick then finds himself in an office facing Mildred Proctor. Mildred explains that Nick missed the judgment, which will lead him to hell due to his corruption as a cop. However, they need his skills. Then, she invites Nick to become a part of the RIPD, also known as the Rest in Peace Department. Their task is to apprehend deceased individuals who missed their judgment and ensure they are placed in their proper destination. When Nick learns that they will bring him back to Boston, he immediately agrees, hoping to regain his former life. Mildred understands his motivation, but unfortunately, it won't be possible. She does, however, promise him a favorable recommendation during his judgment. She proceeds to explain to Nick that their targets are called deados, deceased individuals who also miss judgment and now coexist with humans. However, once revealed, they turn out to be monsters. Curious, Nick inquires about how these deados manage to remain in the living world. Mildred explains that due to the large number of daily deaths, some slip through the system. She then warmly welcomes him to RIPD Boston. Following that, Mildred introduces Nick to his partner, Roy, a former lawman and Mildred's former lover. Like Nick, Roy was also killed by his partner and now prefers working alone, but Mildred informs him that he has no choice. The two men return to the living world, where Nick witnesses his own funeral. He desperately approaches Julia, attempting to disclose the truth, but she fails to recognize him. Local police officers, including Bobby, intervene and halt his efforts. It turns out that in the eyes of the living, RIPD officers appear and sound completely different. It's as if the universe itself prevents them from revealing their true identities. In their living identities, Nick appears as an elderly Chinese man, while Roy takes on the appearance of a hot blonde woman. During their first mission together, Roy explains that deados leave negative traces wherever they go, making them easy to track. Withering plants, malfunctioning electronic devices, and negative energy are all indicators connected to deados. They proceed to interrogate a man named Stanley, bombarding him with questions until he pops off, revealing his true deado form. Nick moves to restrain the deado, but it fiercely fights back, tearing off its own arm and escaping. During their pursuit, the deado swallows some gold pieces. They continue chasing it, and Nick uses the deado's own arm to defeat it. The deado then vomits the gold pieces, which Nick recognizes as the same ones he and Bobby stole earlier. In a moment of distraction, the deado tries to attack Nick, but Roy shoots and kills it. Mocking Nick for his performance, Roy's taunting angers Nick, prompting him to throw Roy in front of a moving bus. At the police station, Nick convinces Roy that they should further investigate the gold since Stanley, the deado, went to great lengths to protect it. Initially reluctant, Roy's ego is eventually appeased by Nick's persuasion. The following day, Roy takes Nick to meet Elliot, another deado who serves as their informant. Nick questions Elliot about the gold but receives no useful information. However, Nick notices that Elliot is lying. They observe Elliot from a distance and are surprised to see Bobby meeting with him. Bobby obtains the gold from Elliot and leaves. Intrigued, Roy decides to assist Nick in his investigation, and they follow Bobby to Nick's house. There, they witness Bobby digging up the gold that Nick had buried. Nick witnesses Julia's disappointment in him, while Roy demands an explanation. Nick confesses that he did it for the money, but is unaware of the gold's connection to the deados. The two tail Bobby to the airport, where he meets another man. Nick and Roy ambush the man and force him into a freezer at gunpoint. They interrogate him about the gold, but he responds with nothing but arrogance. Nick threatens to forcibly reveal his true form, but the man undergoes the transformation voluntarily, becoming the same big fat man as before. Returning to the present, the two resume their pursuit of the Deado. They encounter difficulties and cause accidents along the way. Eventually, Nick manages to seize the gold from the Deado, but it escapes. Back at the station, Mildred reprimands them for allowing a Deado not only to escape, but also to be exposed to the public in broad daylight. As a consequence, they are taken to the Eternal Affair Department. There, they discover that the gold is part of an artifact known as the Staff of Jericho. The Staff of Jericho has the power to reverse the tunnel to the afterlife. If used, the dead will descend upon the world of the living, bringing about its end. Additionally, the two protagonists are suspended and face a hearing that will likely result in their erasure. With his time running out, Nick seeks to reveal himself to Julia once more. Initially, it appears to be working, but Julia dismisses him and walks away. Roy witnesses the encounter and advises Nick to let Julia move on and live without him. He reminds Nick that their duty is to create a peaceful world for the living. However, Nick doesn't take the advice well and speaks ill of Roy. Eventually, Nick realizes his mistake and apologizes to Roy. They both agree to prevent the impending apocalypse. Nick suspects that Bobby is not just a messenger, but a Deado himself. However, he doesn't detect any Deado energy from him. Roy informs Nick about a rare artifact that can mask the negative energy emitted by Deados. Nick recalls that Bobby always carries a particular bracelet, claiming it's from his grandmother. Meanwhile, Bobby meets another Deado to exchange a piece of another artifact. Their conversation reveals their plan to complete the goal for the Staff of Jericho. The following day, Julia contacts Bobby to inform him about Nick's revelation from the previous night. This leads Bobby to believe that Nick is returned as an officer of the RIPD. Nick and Roy arrive at Bobby's location, and he quickly hides another piece of gold. They corner him, and Nick instructs Bobby to remove the medallion from his bracelet. As soon as Bobby takes off the medallion, the surroundings decay instantly. After confiscating the gold, Nick and Roy apprehend Bobby, who offers no resistance. At the station, it becomes evident that other officers have apprehended numerous Deados, including the one Bobby met the previous night. It turns out that Bobby and the other Deados orchestrated the entire situation. When the evidence vault containing the gold opens, Bobby activates the artifact that slows down the RIPD officers. Seizing the opportunity, the Deados move to collect the gold and escape. Roy successfully shoots the artifact, but it's too late. The Deados have already taken to the streets, revealing themselves to the public during daylight. Bobby receives a phone from a Deado and informs the Big Fat Deado that they have obtained all the gold. The Big Fat Deado then commands other Deados to begin constructing the Staff of Jericho. A spiritual shootout ensues as soon as the RIPD officers enter the world of the living. Being from the old Western cowboy era, Roy easily takes down the Deados. Suddenly, a vortex appears in the sky, and the two officers quickly follow Bobby and his gang. However, the Big Fat Deado and his ghost block the road to the Commonwealth building where the artifact is being built. The Deados have ghostly vehicles to pursue Nick and Roy through the streets. Nick skillfully drives through a decaying car park, causing the Deados to lose track of them. Meanwhile, Bobby has instructed other Deados to bring Julia to him to use her blood as a sacrifice to complete the Staff of Jericho. He appears in front of Julia, terrifying her. Returning to Nick and Roy, they encounter the Big Fat Deado and his gang. Nick once again employs his driving skills to evade them. Meanwhile, at the top of the Commonwealth building, Bobby is about to sacrifice Julia to the artifact when Nick and Roy arrive. Uncharacteristically, Bobby immediately stabs Julia without delivering a monologue. This sparks a battle between the two RIPD officers and the Deados. While engaged in combat, the artifact begins draining Julia's blood and activates. The dead begin descending from the sky. Nick and Roy navigate their way through the Deados, with Roy taking care of the artifact, while Nick confronts Bobby face to face. They engage in a fight, but Bobby clearly has the upper hand. Struggling with the artifact, Roy decides to fashion a bullwhip and exert all his strength to pull a truck down onto the artifact to destroy it. Distracted, Nick seizes the opportunity to point a gun at Bobby and shoot him in the face. Nick hurries to Julia, but she is losing a significant amount of blood. Time freezes around them, and Julia finally sees Nick's true appearance. Sharing a moment together, Nick advises Julia to move on and continue living. He expresses his eternal love for her and lets Julia go. She then awakens in a hospital. A doctor, who is revealed to be Mildred in her living identity, assures Nick that Julia will be fine. As they leave, Mildred informs them that the Eternal Affair has given Nick a warning but added 53 more years to Roy's term. Roy is angry, but his mood changes when Mildred returns his cowboy hat. The movie concludes with Nick assuming a new living identity as a Girl Scout wearing orthodontic headgear.